It happens, that's life. My dad was not a person that had narrow-minded attitudes, and neither do I.
Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, had a voice so powerful it felt like it could shake the gates of heaven. The world saw her strength, her grace, and her unshakable faith, but what they never saw was the storm she carried inside. Behind every song of praise was a pain that never stopped burning. Men loved her, used her, and some even tried to control her. She forgave most of them, but one man crossed a line so deep she erased him from her life forever. Even when she stood on top of the world, his presence haunted her like a shadow that wouldn't fade. This isn't just a story about fame or pride. It's the secret Aretha took with her when she left this world. The truth about the man she couldn't stand, the one who pushed her to the edge of forgiveness.
Are you broke? I have no money problems, believe me.
So I'm thinking,
no
are you broke?
Yes, no money problems whatsoever. That's Tony Braxton. That's not me.
Yeah. Oh, that's ridiculous. That would be ridiculous, right? After 50 years, please.
Before the awards, before the spotlight, there was the church, New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan, where young Aretha learned her voice could move both heaven and earth. It was the late 1940s, and Sunday mornings in Detroit felt like fire and thunder bursting through stained glass. The pews overflowed with believers, the air heavy with sweat, perfume, and the sound of hallelujah. At the pulpit stood Reverend C.L. Franklin, tall, magnetic, and commanding, known across America as the man who could make sinners break down in tears. They called him the $1 Million Voice, a preacher so powerful his sermons were pressed onto vinyl and echoed from Detroit to Chicago to Memphis.
Well, let's see, Rolling in the Deep. I liked it. When I first heard it, I liked it. I saw some of Adele's promo, and a lot of young kids were on the bus. They were singing it, and they were having a really, really wild, good time.
But behind that golden voice was another kind of power, one that didn't always feel like love. C.L. Franklin wasn't just a preacher, he was a brand, a businessman, and a star before that word even meant fame. He ran his church like an empire and his home like a studio, with every spotlight pointed right at his little girl, Aretha. By 1953, when Aretha was just 11, he began taking her on the road with him, performing in what the press called the Gospel Caravan. It was a fiery revival that rolled from city to city across the South. Crowds gasped as the young girl sang Precious Lord with a voice that sounded far beyond her years. But when the lights dimmed and the music faded, she was still a child, under her father's rule, expected to obey, perform, and stay silent. Writers like Craig Werner and David Ritz later painted Reverend C.L. Franklin as a man of God with a devil's appetite, preaching heaven by day and chasing temptation by night. On Sunday mornings, he spoke about purity and redemption with fiery conviction. But when darkness fell over Detroit, his home turned into a buzzing hotspot filled with laughter, music, and temptation that ran deep. Politicians, singers, and preachers crowded his living room, and the lines between church and nightlife started to blur. Aretha saw everything, the brilliance and the chaos. She watched her father inspire thousands while wrestling with his own demons. The same hands that baptized souls were the ones pouring whiskey for gospel legends. She adored him, yet a quiet fear always lingered. Fear of his temper, of the way his love could switch off in a single moment. By 1956, Aretha's voice had already become famous in church circles.
Rolling in the deep, you know.
People whispered that it carried power straight from heaven itself. That same year, she recorded her first gospel album, Songs of Faith, right inside the church where she'd learned to sing. But every deal, every song, every dollar flowed through her father's hands. C.L. Franklin signed her contracts, picked her songs, and told Columbia Records, "You don't just get Aretha, you get me." Even as she stood under the bright stage lights, his shadow loomed close, always watching, always deciding.
No, with singers, it's a thing sometimes where you hear a great song and you said, oh man, I wish I'd have got that song first, you know? So after it's been out a while, you have the opportunity to re-record it after a while, you know, after so many years. And then we don't own these songs. You know, anybody can sing a song. We don't own them.
Aretha once said her father gave her both a gift and a burden, that incredible voice. He taught her that faith could lift her higher than anyone, but it could also trap her in chains she couldn't see. The lessons she learned inside that Detroit church stayed with her forever. In her world, love was never soft or easy. It came wrapped in control, tied to duty, and blessed with fear. Long before any man ever broke her heart, her father had already shown her that power can wear the mask of devotion. That was where her legend began. and where her first wound was born, one she could never quite escape. Then came part 2, Ted White, the man who turned her world upside down. It started like something out of a love story, burning bright in the electric energy of 1961 Detroit. Aretha was just 19. Quiet, glowing, already a rising star in gospel circles, known for a voice that could melt stone. Ted White was 29, smooth, handsome, always dressed to impress, the kind of man who walked into a room like he already owned it. Her friends tried to warn her, whispering that he was slick, but Aretha was young, in love, and ready to believe in something that felt like freedom.
Because they couldn't really sing, but they were just having such a good time. I said, you know, I like that melody and I like that song.
Ted White was dangerous, a man with more charm than conscience. But Aretha, desperate to break free from her father's grip, saw him as her escape route. Or at least that's what she wanted to believe. Within months, Ted wasn't just her husband, he became her manager too. He handled her bookings, made the deals, told her what to wear, where to perform, and even who she could talk to. On paper, he looked like the man building her empire. In truth, he was quietly taking her freedom apart piece by piece. People around them started to notice the tension. Musicians from Columbia Records described Ted White as controlling and quick-tempered, always on edge. Bassist Joe Tex remembered how Ted's eyes would darken whenever Aretha laughed with another man. He acted like her joy belonged to him. He didn't like anyone touching what he thought was his.
Young performer, good writer, producer.
One musician recalled, "At first, the signs were subtle, hidden beneath perfect outfits and polite smiles. Studio engineers would describe moments of dead silence, followed by sudden bursts of anger that left everyone uneasy. Aretha's eyes, usually so full of light, began to shift between defiance and quiet fear. In David Ritz's biography, Respect, one of Aretha's closest friends said it best. She'd show up with her hair perfect, her nails shining, but her spirit looked gone. It was clear. The Queen of Soul was fighting a battle no one could see. Ted's temper could explode out of nowhere. One missed note, one late rehearsal, even a simple chat he didn't like could set him off. He followed Aretha everywhere. To interviews, photo shoots, recording sessions, demanding total control over every decision. To the world, she was the Queen of Soul, powerful and untouchable. But behind closed doors, she lived under constant pressure, feeling trapped in a marriage that stole her peace. Everything came crashing down in the summer of 1968.
Okay, great gowns, beautiful gowns.
The civil rights movement was in full force, and Aretha had just finished performing in Montgomery, Alabama, singing alongside gospel choirs to raise money for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s foundation. Her voice carried hope for millions, but behind that strength, she was reaching her breaking point. Just 2 weeks later, on August 15, 1968, she arrived in Augusta, Georgia, ready to headline a charity concert at the Civic Center. The crowd was electric that night. Aretha opened with Chain of Fools, and her voice shook the hall with raw power. But backstage, another storm was brewing. Witnesses later said Ted had been drinking before the show, his jealousy boiling over.
Whitney was a talent, definitely a talent. She had a gift. And Sissy's baby.
During the break, he accused her of being too friendly with a saxophonist. His words sharp and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The argument turned explosive, voices echoing down the corridor until everything stopped in shock at his sudden outburst. That moment changed everything for Aretha, and it marked the beginning of her fight to reclaim her freedom. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Get him off her!" and security rushed in, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Aretha didn't step back on stage that night. The crowd waited nearly half an hour before an announcer came out with a calm excuse.
Nicki Minaj, No, I'm gonna pass on that one.
Technical difficulties, but behind that polite lie, chaos was unfolding. Back at the hotel, Aretha packed in silence, her hands trembling as she wiped away smudged makeup. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just moved with quiet determination. The next morning, she boarded a flight back to Detroit, alone. She didn't tell anyone where she was headed or what had happened. But according to biographer David Ritz, that night in a dim Georgia hotel room overlooking the skyline, she whispered to herself, "Never again." It was the moment she promised no man would ever control her life again. Their marriage dragged on a little longer, full of broken apologies, fake promises, and empty charm. Ted begged, threatened, and tried to sweet-talk his way back into her trust, the way controlling people often do, but Aretha had reached her limit. By 1969, she filed filed for divorce and walked away from the man who tried to cage her spirit.
Supposedly, it has such a range that no matter what key you begin in, the lows are too low and the highs are too high.
No, because when you have range, you can go from one end of the spectrum to the other.
When reporters pressed her about it, she gave them nothing but a calm, short reply. It just wasn't right. Behind closed doors, though, she told her friends the truth, that freedom had finally come at a heavy price, but it was worth every step. Aretha finally learned what love should never feel like. Decades later, whenever journalists brought up Ted White's name, her face would tighten and her voice would change. She'd simply move on without a word. She never spoke his name in public again. In one rare interview from the early 1990s, when a reporter mentioned her first husband, Aretha paused for what felt like forever, before saying quietly, "He's someone I learned from, and that's all I'll say." That chapter of her life became like a ghost, always there but never spoken of. Behind every song about freedom, heartbreak, and redemption, that pain lingered in her voice. When she sang Think or Respect, she wasn't just performing, she was surviving.
About Beyonce there, because you're a big fan of hers as well.
Yes, I heard she was a fan of mine.
Ted White had taken her youth, her trust, and almost her spirit, but he could never take her power or her will to rise again. And yet, as dark as that story was, Ted wasn't the one she truly despised. That man came later, and his name carried even more weight. Part 3, James Brown, the rivalry beneath the soul. By the early 1970s, soul music wasn't just a sound anymore, it was an empire. And at the center of it stood two giants who refused to bow to anyone.
If I really, really, really had to, I suppose I would, but since I really, really, really don't have to, I don't.
Aretha Franklin and James Brown. Two unstoppable forces, both crowned in rhythm and pride, each fighting to prove who truly ruled the kingdom of soul. Aretha had just dropped Chain of Fools, shaking the music world to its core, while James Brown was sitting high on his throne as the godfather of soul. What should have been a moment of pure celebration for Black excellence turned into an intense power clash. James showed up hours late, demanded to close the show, and made the organizers switch the whole lineup just to please him. Aretha, who had been rehearsing since sunrise, stood quietly in the wings as James Brown's band roared through the hall, every horn blaring, every drum booming, drowning out everything in its path. The crowd went wild. The applause was thunderous. When Aretha finally stepped on stage, the audience was tired, their energy drained, but she sang anyway. And she owned that stage. Every note she hit sliced through the air like glass, fierce and flawless. Two legends shared that stage that night.
Unfortunately, the young men were a little too young. They should have been just a little older, like maybe 10, 15 years older, and I would have dipped with one of them.
But only one of them walked off truly smiling. Then came 1971, when President Richard Nixon invited Aretha Franklin to perform at the White House. The very next day, James Brown called his manager in a fury and made sure he got an invite too. The rivalry had officially gone from the stage to the highest office in America. James Brown wanted his name shining anywhere Aretha Franklin's appeared. The media loved it, calling her the queen and him the godfather. What started as friendly competition turned into a full-on rivalry. Both were worshipped, both unstoppable, and neither one could stand being seen as second best.
You want to talk about sex?
Yeah. The tension finally exploded on March 10th, 1973 at the Soul Train Awards in Los Angeles. Backstage was pure chaos. Cameras flashing, journalists shouting, managers running from room to room. Aretha had just wrapped up a stunning televised duet with Ray Charles when witnesses said a loud argument erupted near the stairwell. James Brown, reportedly intoxicated, confronted her right there in front of crew members and other artists. He criticized her set, saying she was turning soul into church drama, and Aretha didn't back down.
Put up here on a pedestal.
No, darling, I'm just a baby.
Yeah.
Voices rose, tempers flared, and for a moment it looked like the two legends might take it too far. A sound technician stepped in fast, and security rushed over before things spilled out onto the main floor.
Lies, lies, and more lies.
Within minutes, the story was racing through the ballroom like wildfire. By the next morning, Variety ran a small column about a heated altercation between two soul icons. No names were printed, but everyone in the industry knew exactly who it was. From that night on, Aretha Franklin and James Brown kept their distance, and when they were both booked for a TV gala in Chicago in 1975, producers made sure their paths never crossed again. At the 1975 gala, Aretha's team made one thing clear. She and James Brown would not be crossing paths.
Desensitizing, you know, I did go to a Fearless Flyers class, and you're to desensitize. You go through the same procedure that you would if you were flying, going to the desk, calling, checking on a flight, any specific flight you'd like to take, that kind of thing.
They demanded separate entrances, different dressing rooms, and zero overlap backstage. The producers agreed without hesitation. James took it as proof that people still feared his power, while Aretha saw it as protection. Not fear, but peace of mind. Their feud became the stuff of legend, an unspoken storm that followed every award show, tribute concert, and industry event for the next 30 years. Neither would mention the other publicly, yet everyone felt that tension whenever their names appeared in the same headline. Then came May 1988.
It's really not for me to say.
When James Brown made front-page news after a high-speed chase in Georgia, reporters ran to Aretha for a statement, but she kept silent. Behind closed doors, though, she told her friends she wasn't surprised. She believed he had become the very warning that soul music once preached about, the downfall that happens when brilliance loses its humility. Years later, on December 25th, 2006, when the news broke that James Brown had passed away, Aretha stayed home in Detroit, completely alone. She didn't attend the funeral, but she sent lilies, her favorite flower.
You have any kind of events with him?
No.
With a simple card that read, "Peace at last." Reporters called her absence cold, even disrespectful, but those who truly knew her understood that was her way of ending a long, painful chapter filled with pride, rivalry, and reflection. The Queen had finally closed the book on her own terms. Two voices that once carried a generation, Aretha Franklin and James Brown, had turned into mirrors of each other's fire, raw ambition and fierce ego, both blessed, both cursed. They stood as symbols of greatness, yet prisoners of their own pride. Aretha could sing respect louder than anyone alive, but whenever his name came up, she shut down completely. Respect became her armor, silence, her revenge.
Wonderful when one is influencing to the degree that I was.
Part 4, the clash with Luther Vandross, the man she couldn't forgive. By the early 1980s, the throne of soul began to tremble.
I hear myself. I know when someone has been influenced.
The sound that once ruled every radio station was fading, and the woman who built it all, Aretha Franklin, stood at a crossroads between legacy and reinvention. Columbia Records wanted her to shine again, so they brought in a young powerhouse producer, Luther Vandross, a perfectionist with a sharp ear and an even sharper attitude. At just 30 years old, Luther was confident, stylish, and determined to give Aretha's music a modern twist that could take over the charts. Their first studio session kicked off on December 2nd, 1981 at the legendary Power Station Studios in Manhattan.
Everyone talks about, oh, I love Aretha, I model myself after Aretha, that kind of thing. Who's your favorite? Who's the person?
The plan sounded perfect. Fuse old school soul with sleek modern energy and bring back the Queen's crown in a new era. But what followed wasn't harmony, it was friction. Luther arrived with electronic drums, polished synthesizers, and smooth radio-ready arrangements that stripped away the church fire that lived in Aretha's sound. She wanted emotion, he wanted precision. The clash was instant, sparks flying across the booth, and not the romantic kind.
You admire, the things you admire. After myself.
Two perfectionists, two icons, both too proud to bend, were about to turn that Manhattan studio into a battlefield of pure soul and unstoppable pride. Aretha craved real music, live horns, raw grooves, and that unpredictable spark that made every take feel alive. But in the studio, things were tense. Assistants later said the air felt thicker than smoke during those long nights. Engineers whispered that neither Aretha nor Luther would back down. Every note was a power struggle.
You won't be getting paid. Did you hear that? All right.
Then came January 22nd, 1982, the day everything snapped. They were working on Jump to It when Luther suddenly stopped the playback mid-session and demanded that an entire verse be redone. The room froze. Aretha said nothing. She simply walked out of the booth and vanished for hours.
Lauryn Hill was saying that after you had done the vocal session and you had left, and I don't know if it was a rose, it's still a rose, but something like that. She said she went into the booth and she said it smelled like church. It was pure and full of energy.
And what does church smell like?
Smells like old books to me.
What church did you go to?
When she finally returned, her face was calm, but her voice, ice cold, sharp enough to slice through steel. She delivered one take, pure precision with no emotion left to spare, and that's the version that ended up on the record. The song shot straight to #1, but the victory came with scars. The success of Jump To It fooled everyone. Columbia executives saw chart numbers and headlines, but Aretha saw betrayal.
He's hot. Real hot. He's hot. Very hot.
Plans for another marriage?
Young and bad and hot.
Luther was out giving interviews, calling himself the man who brought Aretha back, taking credit for the sound she had built her entire life. By August 1983, Jet magazine ran a feature labeling him the man who saved the Queen. Aretha read it alone in her Los Angeles hotel suite. And according to insiders, she quietly ripped the magazine in half. Behind that flawless smile was silent humiliation. The Queen of Soul felt like her legacy had been stolen, rewritten as the creation of a newcomer who forgot who taught the world what soul really meant.
No, I love to eat. And so there's nothing therapeutic about it. I love to eat. And so I like to cook.
The months that followed were nothing short of war. Every studio session for her next album, Get It Right, turned into a battleground of clashing egos and wounded pride. Assistants said the tension was unbearable. Every rehearsal felt like a storm waiting to break. On November 10th, 1983, inside Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia, things finally erupted. Witnesses described shouting so loud it echoed down the hallway. By midnight, Aretha's crew had packed their gear and walked out, leaving Luther behind to finish the vocal overdubs alone. That night, the partnership officially collapsed, before the record was even complete. When Get It Right dropped the following year, both their names were still printed side by side, bound together by contract, not by trust. Aretha refused every joint interview request, and Luther stopped calling completely. The silence between them wasn't temporary, it was final. What had started as creative tension grew into something much deeper, a wound that struck right at the core of Aretha's pride, her faith, and her authority. Those were the pillars she built her entire identity on, and he had shaken them all. Time didn't heal it either. When Luther Vandross suffered a stroke in 2003, Aretha sent flowers but no note.
Talk show, Whitney's mother, Cissy Houston, was one of 3 backup singers.
I don't know what that was about. I don't know.
You don't know?
It's certainly not, I saw some pictures not very attractive or flattering.
2 years later, on July 1st, 2005, the world woke to the news of his passing. Tributes flooded in, fans wept, and artists across generations honored him. But Aretha stayed silent. Her respect for him lived in her music, but her forgiveness never came. Aretha stayed completely silent for 48 hours after Luther Vandross's death, before finally releasing a short, carefully worded statement through her publicist, "I wish him peace." Those 4 words carried weight, not anger, but something far deeper. It wasn't bitterness she felt. It was the quiet refusal to reopen a wound that had never truly healed.
Okay, check's not big enough yet. All right.
People close to her later said Luther was the only man who ever made Aretha doubt her own worth, and that cut deeper than any headline or heartbreak. He didn't harm her physically or take her money. Instead, he touched the one place she kept sacred: her voice, her studio, her creative soul. What had once been her sanctuary became a space filled with humiliation and power struggles. That kind of betrayal stayed longer than any broken marriage or rivalry ever could. Years later, when an interviewer gently asked her about forgiveness, Aretha smiled that small, knowing smile and said she believed in it.
You know, and I was saying, you were entirely too fat for words.
For everyone, eventually. But those who truly knew her caught the silence that followed. A pause heavy enough to say everything she didn't. Some scars, even for the Queen of Soul, were etched too deeply. Not just in memory, but in the very notes of her music. Luther Vandross had given her one of her greatest comebacks, yet in return, he took something no chart could measure: her trust. And for Aretha Franklin, that was the one sin she could never forgive. Part 5. The public feud with Dionne Warwick, the betrayal that reopened old wounds.
I gained a few pounds, but I'm usually slim fast and young men.
By the spring of 2017, Aretha Franklin was 75, her body tired from decades of battles, her voice softer but still carrying that same unshakable soul. Her pride, though, untouched, sharp as the first note she ever sang. The Queen of Soul had already outlasted most of her rivals, sung for presidents and popes, and turned every hardship into history. But on April 25th, 2017, she shocked the world one last time.
Okay, great gowns, beautiful gowns.
By declaring war on another music legend. That morning, the Associated Press received a 5-page letter straight from Aretha's Detroit office, typed, signed, and sealed personally by Aretha Louise Franklin herself. The letter was bold, fiery, and impossible to ignore.
I stopped smoking in January, and I gained 50 pounds in the interim, but that's all right.
In it, she accused her longtime friend and fellow gospel icon, Dionne Warwick, of spreading lies about her in public. The tone was crystal clear. Aretha was done staying silent. Within hours, headlines exploded everywhere. Aretha Franklin slams Dionne Warwick in shocking statement.
I'm still 50, baby. I'm 49. How do you know you're 50? I'm 49. You know you're 50.
Social media lit up, fans debated, and the world wanted to know what could make the Queen of Soul speak out so fiercely after all these years.
No, I'm 55, but I didn't want to tell nobody. She wouldn't tell us.
The spark behind it all traced back to an old wound. The funeral of Whitney Houston. 5 years earlier, on February 18, 2012, Aretha had been scheduled to perform at the service. But after suffering severe leg spasms, she was forced to cancel at the very last minute. It was a decision made out of pain, not pride. Yet that single moment would come back to haunt her in a way no one saw coming. In Aretha's absence at Whitney Houston's funeral, Dionne Warwick took the stage at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark to speak before the congregation. During her heartfelt tribute, she referred to Aretha as Whitney's godmother and said she was right here in the church with us in spirit. It sounded harmless, even sweet, at the time. But to Aretha, that one line became a quiet bruise that never faded.
Folks like it. And the brothers are not complaining.
She later revealed that the comment made it seem like she'd faked her illness to avoid attending the service, something that deeply embarrassed her. The Queen of Soul, known for her dignity, never forgot the sting of that public misunderstanding. For years, she stayed silent, letting the rumor rest until 2017, when she was preparing to retire. That's when Aretha decided to set the record straight once and for all. Her official letter to the press didn't come in anger. It came in ice, calm, precise, and final. In it, she accused Dionne of deliberately inventing the story, writing plainly, "Dionne knows exactly what she did. She lied on me." Every word landed like a thunderclap, sharp, cold, and undeniable. The world was stunned. Two women who had shared stages since the 1960s, who had prayed together before gospel shows and embraced like sisters backstage, were now split apart by scandal. Reporters swarmed Dionne for a response, and she brushed it off with a laugh, saying she had no time for nonsense. That one dismissive remark hit Aretha harder than any headline. It reopened an old wound she had spent years trying to bury. A few days later, Aretha's team released another short, no-nonsense statement. The issue is not up for debate. And just like that, the story exploded. The feud dominated entertainment headlines for weeks. News anchors, magazines, and social media couldn't get enough. Twitter turned into a battleground. Some defended Dionne, others stood firmly behind Aretha. Everyone agreed on one thing: it was rare for the Queen of Soul to call anyone out by name. Aretha had faced betrayal her entire life, but she'd almost never spoken it aloud. Those closest to her knew this fight wasn't really about Whitney or that funeral. It was about something far deeper. It reopened a scar left decades earlier by Luther Vandross, the wound of public humiliation and feeling misrepresented before the world. For Aretha, a lie wasn't just a false story, it was desecration, a betrayal of everything she stood for. Someone could hurt her in private and still find mercy, but to twist her image in public, that was beyond forgiveness. Her reputation, her truth, her voice, those were sacred. This feud also carried a heavy generational weight. Dionne Warwick came from the same gospel bloodline as Aretha's father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, a family tied by faith and music. Dionne had performed at his church, prayed in the same pews, and shared the same stage of spirit and song. That made the fallout sting even more. This wasn't just a public spat, it was a heartbreak between two women who had once called each other sisters in soul. In the early 1980s, Aretha Franklin's career had hit a rough patch. Columbia Records was struggling, her chart numbers were slipping, and critics had begun whispering that the Queen of Soul might have lost her crown. But then came Clive Davis, the sharp-eyed mastermind behind Aretha Records, a man famous for resurrecting careers and reshaping stars. He promised Aretha a rebirth, and he delivered. Under Clive's direction, Aretha made a massive comeback. In 1985, she released Who's Zoomin' Who, a record that sold millions and introduced her powerhouse voice to a whole new generation. The world saw the perfect partnership.
You're a big fan of hers as well.
Yes, I heard she was a fan of mine.
The unstoppable icon, working in harmony. But beneath that polished surface, something else was brewing. A quiet tension that ran deeper than anyone realized. Clive was a businessman to his core. all about structure, marketing, and trends. Aretha, on the other hand, believed in faith, instinct, and pure fire. Their chemistry in the studio made magic, but it was fragile, one spark away from friction. When Who's Zoomin' Who hit #1 in August 1985, Clive threw a lavish private party at his Manhattan penthouse to celebrate. Cameras flashed as he proudly held the platinum plaque, standing beside Aretha, who smiled for the photos, but her eyes told another story. Later, in an interview with Jet magazine, she admitted, "They wanted to polish me into something I'm not." It was a rare moment of honesty, a glimpse behind the glimmering lights, showing that even at the height of her comeback, Aretha Franklin was still fighting to keep her crown on her own terms. "I wasn't," Aretha once said flatly, her way of admitting that the success, though massive, didn't feel real to her. To Clive Davis, every hit was a calculated strategy. To Aretha, it felt like a transaction. Business dressed up as art. By 1987, Clive started steering her toward big pop collaborations. Names like George Michael, Annie Lennox, and even whispers of a duet with Michael Jackson. Aretha pushed back hard. She feared that becoming a crossover act would water down the sacred gospel roots that made her who she was. That same year, when she won the Grammy for Freeway of Love, she stood on stage glowing and gracious, thanking her family, her faith, and her fans, but she never mentioned Clive Davis. Insiders caught the omission instantly. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message. Then came the betrayal she could never overlook. In 1990, during a private Arista Records board meeting, Clive approved a new marketing campaign branding Aretha as America's Lady of Soul. To the company, it sounded elegant, even respectful. But to Aretha Franklin, it was an insult dressed as praise. She had fought her entire life to be recognized as the queen, the first, the one, the original. To suddenly be labeled a lady among others felt like a demotion, a rewriting of her legacy she refused to accept. For Clive, it was just marketing. For Aretha, it was personal. Another moment when someone tried to shape her crown into something smaller than it was meant to be. The new slogan, America's Lady of Soul, hit billboards and TV screens across the country without Aretha's consent. When she first saw it plastered across a Los Angeles freeway on March 3rd, 1990, she was furious. She immediately called her team demanding it be taken down. Within weeks, the ad disappeared, but the damage had already sunk deep. The tension between Aretha and Clive Davis only grew from there. As Clive began signing younger stars like Whitney Houston and Toni Braxton, Aretha felt herself being pushed further from Arista's spotlight, replaced by the very talent she had inspired. At the 1994 Grammy Awards, that quiet rivalry reached its most visible moment. Aretha sat in the audience while Clive walked on stage to present an award to Whitney. The cameras panned to Aretha's face. Perfectly still, unreadable, her expression a mask of poise. That frozen moment became headline gold for tabloids, splashed under captions like, "The Queen left waiting." Though they never fought publicly, the warmth between them evaporated. Their relationship became all surface. Polite greetings, formal invites, no real connection left behind the smiles. When Arista threw its glittering 25th anniversary gala in 2000, Aretha showed up in true queen fashion, sang one unforgettable song, and left before Clive's closing speech. Her driver later shared that she didn't say a single word on the ride back to her hotel, just stared out the window in silence. In interviews that followed, she stayed graceful, never spilling bitterness, but everyone could tell. The bond that once built her second rise had quietly crumbled, leaving behind only respect wrapped in distance. "Mr. Davis did a great deal for me," Aretha once said, carefully adding, "and I wish him continued success." It sounded gracious, perfectly diplomatic, but her closest friends caught the undertone immediately. Gratitude was easy for Aretha, trust was not. Deep down, she felt that her very soul, the essence of her art, had been polished, packaged, and sold without her permission. Years later, in 2013, Clive Davis released his autobiography, The Soundtrack of My Life. When Aretha reached the chapter about herself, her calm turned to fury. In it, Clive described her as temperamental and overly cautious, claiming he had to coax her into greatness. To Aretha, those words weren't just careless, they were theft. Another man rewriting her story, taking credit for her fire, the same way so many before him had tried to. She never confronted him directly, and she didn't need to. Her silence said everything, but she never forgot. The hurt settled in quietly, becoming part of her armor. By the time she performed at the Kennedy Center Honors in 2015, the distance between them was permanent. That night, Clive sat proudly in the audience as Aretha sang "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman" for Barack and Michelle Obama. Wrapped in a fur coat, her voice trembled with power, radiant, timeless, divine. When she finished and glanced toward the crowd, her eyes never met Clive's. In public, they remained polite. Smiles, handshakes, applause. But privately, Aretha often spoke of one hard lesson fame had taught her. Every savior eventually becomes another form of control. It wasn't bitterness, it was wisdom, earned through decades of fighting to keep her crown on her own terms. Clive Davis had given Aretha Franklin a second rise, a rebirth that brought her back to the top of the charts, but he had also reminded her of something harsh. Even queens can be marketed like products. She didn't hate him, it wasn't rage that lingered. What she felt was colder, the ache of disillusionment, the sting of realizing that trust and control rarely live in the same room. It was a quieter kind of betrayal, but a scar, all the same. As the years passed, her circle grew smaller, her body weaker, yet those old grudges never left. They circled her like ghosts, silent, watchful, unburied memories whispering through her songs. They lived in her voice, haunted her nights, and shaped the legend she became. But Aretha Franklin was never one to surrender her truth. She'd rather carry those ghosts to her grave than let anyone else rewrite her story. Part 7. Legacy. Silence and the weight of unforgiveness. When Aretha Franklin passed away on August 16, 2018, at her home in Detroit, the world stood still. News anchors spoke her name with reverence. Fans wept in the streets. Thousands gathered at Greater Grace Temple to say goodbye to the Queen of Soul. Her golden casket gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, surrounded by mountains of roses and choirs, singing the same hymns she'd once led as a little girl. The cameras showed a nation mourning a legend, but those closest to her knew the truth. Her passing wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. Aretha had left this world the same way she had lived in it, powerful, proud, and fiercely in control of her own story. It was the final curtain. The sealing of secrets Aretha Franklin had carried her entire life.
You're a big fan of hers as well.
In the quiet weeks after her passing,
mine.
those closest to her began to share what they'd all quietly known. Aretha took her grudges to the grave. She had forgiven plenty over the decades, broken promises, shady contracts, missed payments, even public mockery. But there was one thing she never let go of: humiliation. The list of names was etched into her story like verses in a hymn. Ted White, the husband who once ruled her through control. Luther Vandross, the producer who bruised her pride. And Dionne Warwick, the friend whose words turned a funeral into a headline. They had all played a part in her life, but when the world saw what she left behind, their names were nowhere to be found. In 2020, 3 handwritten wills were discovered hidden around her Bloomfield Hills home, tucked under couch cushions and inside notebooks, each one filled with careful notes, instructions for her sons, and details about her estate, yet not a single mention of the people who had once shared her spotlight. Even in death, Aretha remained the editor of her own legacy, rewriting her story exactly the way she wanted it told. One of her former bandmates later said she kept a private list, a quiet ledger of betrayals she never released, carried like a prayer book tucked in her soul. Every slight, every insult, every moment of disrespect, remembered, cataloged, never forgotten. It wasn't spite, it was survival. For Aretha Franklin, forgiveness was a luxury only granted to those who never tried to take her power away. Aretha Franklin could pray for a sinner, feed a stranger, and still turn to ice when it came to someone who crossed her. One of her longtime colleagues told Rolling Stone, Aretha could forgive sin but not disrespect, because sin was between you and God, but disrespect was between you and her. To her, those two things were never the same. That belief defined her strength and her solitude. In her final years, that conviction hardened into a shield. She trusted almost no one. Her calls got shorter, her circle tighter, and her world smaller. She rarely stepped outside her Bloomfield Hills mansion except to perform, and even then, she stayed in command of everything. Her assistant said that no matter how weak her body became, she refused to let anyone else choose her clothes, her schedule, or her set list. Control wasn't just habit, it was her last source of comfort, the one thing no one could take from her. After her funeral, a haunting piece of history surfaced, a recording from her final rehearsal at Detroit's Music Hall in late 2017. The audio captured a softer, fragile voice, but still fierce in its pursuit of perfection. She stopped mid-song again and again, repeating one line until it hit just right. Those who listened said it wasn't just music, it was a final act of defiance. A woman who had spent her whole life mastering her sound, her image, and her destiny, fighting to keep that mastery alive one last time. Even as her strength faded, Aretha Franklin remained what she had always been, the queen who never surrendered control, not to anyone, not even to time itself. It was the sound of a woman who refused to rest until every single note bowed to her command. Aretha Franklin's legacy wasn't built only on her brilliance, it was built on her defiance. She was both adored and feared, a force of nature wrapped in fur and fire. Politicians sought her blessing, musicians idolized her every breath, but inside all that reverence came an unspoken warning. Cross Aretha Franklin and you'd be erased from her kingdom forever. To love her was to accept her rule. She was the voice of forgiveness in her songs, but not always in her life. When her handwritten, unfiled will was finally read aloud in a Michigan courtroom in 2020, one line stopped everyone cold. Everything I am is the result of everything I survived. It wasn't bitterness, it was truth. It was declaration. For Aretha Franklin, pain wasn't destruction. It was fuel. Every betrayal became another verse. Every silence became another note. Every heartbreak was carved into music that the world would never forget. Letting go was never her way, because to let go meant surrender. And surrender was something the Queen of Soul had never learned to do. Her strength came not from peace, but from persistence, from standing tall in every storm thrown her way. Some say hate eats away at the soul, but for Aretha Franklin, it was never hate. It was armor, the only shield strong enough to protect the woman whose voice the world kept trying to own. She sang not just for respect, she sang to remind the world that her story, her struggle, and her crown were hers alone. Aretha Franklin didn't just sing about respect, she lived it, fought for it, and bled for it. Every lyric she wrote came from truth, every melody carried a memory, and every note was born from pain turned into power. The man she truly resented and all those who ever tried to silence her became symbols of a fight much greater than fame, the fight for a woman's right to stand tall and stay unbroken. Forgiveness for Aretha wasn't weakness, it was surrender. And surrender was something she refused to learn. If power was all she had left, she guarded it like gold until her final breath. Her story isn't about bitterness, it's about survival. She turned her anger into an empire, her silence into legacy, and her pain into the soundtrack of an entire generation. Every song, every roar of her voice carried the message that no matter what the world took from her, it could never take her respect. So what do you think? Was Aretha right to hold on to that fire, or did it cost her peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. And hey, if you love uncovering the real stories behind music's greatest legends, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. There are still secrets left in the world of soul, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.